Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are doing something really cool. We're taking some pretty heavy abstract social theory and pulling it right down to earth to see how it operates in the real world. And this is all thanks to a brilliant empirical study authored by Mahnouz Tariq, Dr. Mehvesh Muzaffar, and Dr. Mohammed Asif.
So let me ask you a quick question to start us off. When you think about who truly holds power over your daily life, what immediately comes to mind? Do you think of the government, politicians, the laws of the state? Or, and really think about this, does true power actually come from everyday social expectations? You know, things like being punctual, strict workplace dress codes, or even the unspoken rules of your own family dynamic.
All right, let's dive into this by talking about Michel Foucault. Foucault was a philosopher who had this wild, radical idea about power. He argued that power isn't simply some top-down force exercised by a king or a government. Instead, he proposed that power is actually like an invisible web that we all live in. It functions through our everyday conversations, our routines, and our institutions. And here's the kicker. Foucault argued that this power isn't just restrictive, it's actively productive. It literally produces our knowledge, constructs our subjective realities, and shapes our very identities.
The theoretical architecture of this study just brilliantly maps out that whole journey. You can see how broad institutional power, things like cultural norms and gendered expectations, flows all the way down through disciplinary rules to normalize how we behave. Ultimately, this shapes female identity, but it is absolutely not a one-way street. Power is always met with pushback. There's this constant loop of micro-resistance.
So, here is our game plan for today's explainer. We're going to cover decoding Foucault's everyday power, the local research gap, methodology in southern Punjab, key findings on power and knowledge, surveillance and resistance, and finally, the implications.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Decoding Foucault's Everyday Power. We're going to start with the foundational pillars that set the stage here.
Foucault's whole framework basically rests on three main pillars. First up, the power-knowledge nexus. Foucault argued that every society has a regime of truth, basically accepted norms and institutions that define what is rational or normal. Second, disciplinary techniques. Think about institutions like medicine, psychology, or education. They silently control our normative behavior through constant surveillance and normalization. And third, the productive nature of power, meaning power doesn't just stop us from doing things, it actively creates our social reality.
Moving right along to Section 2, the local research gap. Because, well, what happens when we take these deeply theoretical, often very Western-centric ideas and drop them into a completely different traditional context? Now here's the catch. Feminist scholars have pointed out that while Foucault's framework is amazing for analyzing self-surveillance, he often overlooks patriarchal realities, gendered inequality, and the actual material oppression of women. This sparked a huge question for our researchers. How do women in a non-Western, localized, and highly traditional setting actually perceive and navigate these unseen forces?
Which brings us to Section 3, Methodology in Southern Punjab. To bridge this theoretical gap, the researchers set up a really rigorous comparative survey.
To get a really clear, balanced picture, they went into the district of Dera Ghazi Khan in southern Punjab, Pakistan, and selected a sample of 40 adult women. Half were working women, meaning they spent at least 20 hours a week in formal or informal paid employment outside the home. The other half primarily managed unpaid domestic or home-based activities. This allowed them to compare how entirely different daily routines might shape perceptions of power.
And get this. Using a structured 20-item closed-ended questionnaire, they managed to secure a 76.9% response rate. If you know anything about survey research, you know that is a massive success rate, giving this study some highly reliable, rock-solid empirical weight. Okay, on to Section 4, Key Findings on Power and Knowledge. Let's get into the good stuff, because the consensus among these women was incredibly fascinating.
Check this out. When asked if power is limited to state authorities, a whopping 85% of the participants verified that no, power is absolutely not restricted to the government. It exists in everyday life. This strongly validates Foucault's assertion that power functions at several different social levels.
And building right on top of that, an overwhelming 90% of the women agreed that power isn't a physical thing someone just possesses. It's fluid. It operates within relationships. This proves that these high-level philosophical concepts actually map perfectly onto their lived daily realities.
It gets even more specific. The data clearly shows 80% agreement that everyday rules, things like dress codes and clocking in on time, are potent forms of disciplinary power. Plus, 70% specifically pointed to institutions like schools and hospitals as key sites where this power operates. I mean, think about the last time you had to follow a dress code at work. You're recognizing that your environment regulates you just as much as a state law does. Which naturally leads us into Section 5, surveillance, discipline, and resistance. How do these women respond to being watched and disciplined?
Well, there's this great quote from Foucault that the researchers lean on. Where there is power, there is always a possibility of resistance. Because power is dynamic, right? It triggers local acts of agency where women actively negotiate, strategize, and contest those institutional restraints.
And the data totally backs this up. 77.5% of the women agreed that resistance isn't some outside force. It exists directly within the power structure itself. This reveals a highly sophisticated understanding. Whether it's quiet negotiation within a traditional family or pushing back in the workplace, they understand their resistance is a direct consequence of the power networks they navigate every single day.
Finally, let's look at Section 6, implications and future research. What's the big takeaway from all of this?
Ultimately, this study successfully demonstrates that this invisible, capillary power and the micro-resistance to it functions vividly through indigenous, non-Western cultural structures, not just top-down state mandates. Academically, it highlights that places like educational and familial institutions are major sites of discipline. And publicly, it is a powerful validation that everyday micro-resistance is a crucial, expressive form of female independence.
Now, getting this kind of eye-opening, impactful research out into the world is just so vital. So, if you're out there conducting original, high-quality research that contributes to global scholarship, we highly welcome your future manuscript submissions to BWO Researches International.
We also actively invite researchers, faculty members, and grad students worldwide to explore the latest publications in esteemed journals like the Journal of Academic Research for Humanities and to share them with your colleagues.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a thought to chew on. We've seen how women in southern Punjab recognize and navigate these invisible dynamics. But what about you? Where are the unseen webs of power in your own daily routines, and how are you already resisting them without even realizing it? Thanks so much for joining us, and keep questioning the world around you.